Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the ORSAM seminar for Middle East. The topic that I was given to talk about today is the foreign policy approach of the great powers towards the Middle East. Of course, we are taking this seminar and listening to different lectures on specific topics, and my topic today is to discuss, what is today's Middle East as a geopolitical unit of the world politics, and how it's changed, especially in Cold War era, in terms of Middle East reconceptualization and reimagination by the Middle Eastern people, but also how it's pursued by outside other actors. As a matter of fact, if you are studying political science or international politics, it has been always on the agenda of the world politics as a given menu, as a fixed menu since the perhaps since the 20th century, I should say, but for in our age, at the Ankara political science faculty, it was 1990 and 1991, just immediately after the end of the Cold War in 1989. It was Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait that triggered the intervention of the US-led international coalition. So we have learned, and we have actually watched the first time a war at the CNN, which was broadcasting the real war. The bombs were dropping down on the Baghdad, Basra, and other cities of Saddam-led Iraq of the time to save the Kuwait. And later on, of course, just 10 years later, 2001, the 9/11 event also brought our attentions to the Middle East and American invasion of Iraq, 2001, and then Afghanistan, and then a lot of new projects and approach. And since then, there has been a lot of new developments, including the Arab Spring, Syrian conflicts, Daesh. All are very much interrelated topics that has been prevailing on the agenda of the international politics, especially on the security matters. So what I am trying to say today is I will make analysis based on three levels. One is how international system is affecting the Middle East. What is the Middle East, and how the Middle Eastern states as actor in international politics actually is behaving or is affecting the process that we are witnessing today. From the more conceptual point of view, when we talk about the Middle East, actually it is a changing terminology that you will face. There was no Middle East perhaps 100 years ago. It was a byproduct of the British imperialism in the late 19th century and then early 20th century. It was America who continued the use of this term. Otherwise, there was no Middle East in the past, in the period modern imperialist era. So it's an imperialist construct, which was called Middle East because the world from west to east, actually, from the British Empire point of view, was laying down from the Britain Islands to the Europe, to the today's Middle East or Mediterranean, up until the east, India and China. So the region that we are today, that talk about today, were named or renamed by British scholars and strategists as the Middle East. It's a middle way between London and Beijing. That was the conceptualization. So it's a constructed terminology. From an ancient point of view, more traditionally, what we are naming as Middle East today, or in Arabic terminology, Sharq al-Awsat, Middle East, indeed, very traditionally has been known as the center of the Sharq, or the Orient, or the Eastern. Well, I mean, when we talk about the Sharq or Mashriq, Mashriq is much more today's Jazirat al-Arab, or Arab Peninsula and environment. On the west side was Iklimi Nil, or Nile, I don't know which one you are using, mostly from Mediterranean down to Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, etc. So it was the Nile, or Iklimi Nile, the region of the Nile, which cut across the different regions up until Mediterranean Sea. And the west of the Egypt, from today's Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, and Morocco, they have been called much more Maarif, or the west of Mediterranean side. So this is a traditional understanding. Even the Holy Quran, it says in Mashriq, so it's a Sharq, or Orient. Sometimes it comes to conclusion in the late 19th century, the Eastern question, or Sharq Sorunu, the Orient question. So I think in the last 200 years, and this region has been on the center of discussion for many reasons, including especially in the early 20th century, the war in the dissolve and collapse of the Ottoman Empire in the First War after the Sykes-Picot, and then creation of Israel in the heart of the Arab lands. That makes very much meaningful. From a geopolitical point of view, regardless of culture and tradition or history, of course, the Mediterranean and its environment in the world politics has always been a very critical region. If you read the Ibn Khaldun theories of the civilization, where civilization emerged, and also Birol, I think it was Birol, the Mediterranean region, it's his famous book, or any other geopolitical article should somehow mention the importance of the Mediterranean. It is a warm sea, which is very much livable, which is very much convenient for living, cultivating, agriculture, and that's why it's a trade, commerce from the ancient Greece to Rome. It is the center of the, they were all created around the Mediterranean. So as long as the world is survive, this region, and especially in the east of the Mediterranean, what we call today's Middle East, will always stay as a critical region for any important or big power in the world politics. Well, I mean, adding to all this historical facts, also were energy resources, especially in the early 20th century. The discovery of the oil was certainly a news, which is good or bad. It's I don't know, blessing or curse, but certainly it made, I mean, it's already complicated what has been on the ground because of the historical, geopolitical, strategic and cultural background of the region. Yes, from cultural aspects, we should not forget that all the three important religious traditions actually were born here, from Judaism to Christianity and Islam. That's almost all history of the book, holy books also mention the names here. So this is the kind of in the memory of humanity. Humanity is always somehow here. When it comes to today, in the post Second World War era, actually. It was a defining moment, as it was in the rest of the world for the Middle East as well, because in the Middle East, after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, new countries, new nation states emerged, and a new entity which is loosely defined, and unfortunately not the strong states but the weak states were creating, and British mandate, French mandate, and then of course their gain of independence, but with no real survival, strong state tradition were able to create it by the local politicians, and they have to depend on, therefore, even after the independence, they have to somehow find a way to outsource their security needs from the great powers. And in the face of the emerging bipolar world, some of them contacted with the America, West. Some of them actually come closer to relation with the Soviet Union. So in the aftermath of the Cold War, which was also an opportunity for these states as well to gain their independence, and especially for the people of these states who were not enjoying the basic human rights and freedoms, were very much indeed willing and hopeful, as it was the case in the Central Europe and Eastern Europe countries, which has been on the post-Soviet Union territories in the West. It was a moment of democracy and human rights in the early 1990s. There has been some movement as well in this part of the world. But what happened here is that the great powers, especially American intelligence, intellectuals, scholars, strategists, they were not as much joyful and excited about the demand for human rights and freedoms and democracy or economic openness that raised by the people of the Mediterranean, Middle Eastern Muslim countries, but rather they were very much excited with the emerging new capitalist economy and democracy, growing democracies in Eastern Europe. So there was in the theoretical discussion that whether the democracy and capitalism actually is a Eurocentric phenomenon, which means only can survive and flourish in Western contexts and societies, or can it be exported to the newly emerging nations or regions? Well, there has been a lot of political and theoretical discussion on this matter in political science literature, and when it comes to in the post-Second World War era, some countries such as India, Japan, for instance, even Turkey, become democratic government countries by constitution. There was elections, multi-party politics and competition, etc. But when it comes to Middle Eastern Islamic context, if you read the Jared Diamond or some others, political scientists, you often hear, well, democracy does not work in this part of the world. So-called the theory Arab exceptionalism, which means that the is not compatible with the democracy's pluralistic understanding of politics and society. And some even go beyond suggesting that the rentier economies of the Middle Eastern countries actually may not provide a good base, political, social base or economic base for the proliferation of the pluralist understanding of politics in this region. So up until in the last decade, actually, in the political science literature, the Arab countries were understood to be as the exception to the major trends in the world politics and international developments. But some also in the West, we should be fair, enjoyed some ideas in the early 2000s, just immediately after the 9/11 events, in the fact that they developed what can later be named Greater Middle East Project. Greater Middle East Project basically is a invention of political invention, in the sense that why we are here subject to violent attack in the heart of the capitalism in New York in September 2001. One conclusion was that all of the perpetrators actually were either coming from Egypt or Saudi Arabia or other Islam countries from the Middle East. So what is wrong here? We should be analyzing this, and we should find a political solution in addition to already ongoing military intervention in the region. One idea was, and it was also a proposal by the UN Senate report. If you read the 9/11 report prepared by US Congress, about 500 pages, you will see a lot of idea why it's happened and how to fight against this new kind of September 11 kind of new attacks against the West. Why the West is targeted by that? Why do they hate us? That was the question. That was the question that they tried to understand. The conclusion of the scholars and strategists was that they come down to hunt us here in the United States because they do not enjoy basic political rights and freedom, and they cannot address the grievances and disturbances, the problems they do have against their own rulers. And many of the, especially Middle Eastern countries, were under the government of long-term dictators from Saddam Hussein to Hafiz Assad in Syria or Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, etc., etc. So then the solution, the lasting solution, must be that we have to export some kind of democracy and established multi-party system in the Middle Eastern Muslim countries, so that if there is a fight, and there will be a fight, that must be inside the country. It shouldn't come up to the West, to the United States on the or the Europe. So when the Huntington wrote his books, Clash of Civilizations, in the early 1990s, and when the West witnessed the 9/11, I think it was quoted by Kissinger, rather than creating an environment to fight one civilization against the other, from China versus West, or Islamic world versus West, or India versus West, later on it become the West versus the rest. Rather than formalizing this one, let's create the, or let allow the movements and factors and sources and forces inside civilization to fight each other instead of clash of civilizations. They preferred clash within civilization. That is the motto as a strategy. That's why in the last perhaps 2 decades or so, especially the last decade, we have been witnessing a lot of terrorism and inside fighting or domestic violence in this part of the world. Then the question comes, why the Middle East did not erupt in the early 90s or 2000s, but why now? I mean, why in the last decade? That comes to the third point, or we used, I mean, internal domestic factors, regional forces, and now systemic analysis. I think it has very much to do with the weakening, or some people prefer to use declining, the hegemonic station of the West under the American leadership. If you read the books, articles, journals in the last decade that was published in American journals, not just because of the Trump administration come to power 4 years ago, but even before that, I think it started discussion. Some people say 9/11, but most people agree on the decline and weakening of the American values systems and the confidence in the post financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. And some people get this date a little early. It was a result, but not cause of American irrationality to intervene in Iraq meaninglessly, and the war in Afghanistan really hemorrhaged, created a lot of economic problems for the survival of American hegemony. As early as 1987, Paul Kennedy's book, The Rise and Fall of Great Nations, discovered the weak point or Achilles heels of the empires, what he called the imperial overstretch. If you open too much, if you undertake too much burden as a leader of the hegemony to maintain order and peace and security for their interests, but if your economy is not resilient enough in terms of growth and providing support to maintain this already created global order, then your economy over time weakens and you will lose politically as well. I mean, that was the discussion. And after 2008, if you read any American scholar today who wrote about American role of politics, you will see all these arguments together. Yes, there has been a lot of discussion in the last decade about the decline of the American-led, the Western hegemonic world. Eurocentric world is coming to an end. It doesn't mean it is collapsing, but what is new here is that I think it is the one that there are some strong, newly emerging power centers in terms of economic, politics, and other technological advancements. So it creates a new geopolitical understanding of the world politics. And some people today discuss the fact that we are indeed witnessing a deep restructuring of the global order, from the one, it was the bipolar up until 1990s. It was the just unipolar in the 1990s, but it is not sustainable anymore. Most probably, we will have in the upcoming 2 decades in the process of the power shift. That is another approach to world politics nowadays. We are witnessing a power shift from the West towards the rest, and there have been different new emerging power centers with a demand to share, to have their share in world politics. What I mean is that especially the rise of China effect and American change of the politics, which has been redefined in 2011 by then Secretary of State, Ms. Clinton, who declared openly so-called Asia pivot, which means Asia pivot means that America's central attention in the world politics from a strategic point of view and engagement will be moving from the Europe and the Middle East toward the East. So American basic strategy now, if you read any of its strategy, if you read any of the document with regard to American strategic affairs by official documents, you will see and realize this new trend, which means America's the central point is now focusing on content of China. Okay, that what is happening here? The retreat of the American power from world politics, especially from our region, creating a political and geopolitical vacuum that regional powers or other powers who has interest in the Eastern Mediterranean or the Middle Eastern countries certainly will have more flexibility in projecting power to come down in the Middle East, and that was indeed a game-changing changer in the 2009, 2010, and 2011. So I think the Arab Spring in the Middle East, which is a movement to change the oxymoron leadership in the region from Tunisia to Egypt to the today's Syria and other countries as well, created a new momentum, for change. Unfortunately, not all of them become more peaceful. Even some people can say that it created some very weak and conflicted strategic environment for everybody. So it didn't bring good to ordinary people's life as well. So what I'm trying to say is that I think the eruption of the Arab people, why they didn't succeed in the 1990s, why they couldn't dare in the early 2000s, but why they come to cross in the streets and fought against their dictators, that might somehow explain the loosening and the weakening of the American-led, the Western leadership to maintain the authoritarian monarchies in the region, and because of their lack of the political legitimacy based on the popular will and the popular support, they lost their patronage with the West, and the West also saw some interest in the transformation of the Middle East for their own long-term strategic interest. So what could be long-term strategic interest that the Western strategists might see here? I think it's my own evaluation is that it fits into the, especially from the American point of view, it does fit into the new reimagination of the world politics, or what kind of world that we are heeding or demanding to be. Well, for the America, especially under the Obama administration, when the Arab countries comes to Middle East, there were no any excitement to support the people's right, people's demand for real democracy and human rights regime here. But there was no economic political support that the America or the European Union really showed the mercy when it comes to their Christian cousins in Eastern and Central Europe in the early 1990s. There was no huge moment of excitement by the intellectuals or scholars or people on the street in Europe. Yeah, well, I mean, they were not strong enough to support at the first place, perhaps, but there were no intention as well. If there were intention, they might create, they could have created a Marshall Fund like a fund to support the newly emerging democratic leadership and the movement and actors in the Middle East to help the smooth process of transformation. But rather, the Obama administration left, turned behind what he called, we are watching behind the curtain, what is happening in the Middle East. But it is not what we expect here, especially for democracies like America or the Europe, to just look from the beyond the curtain and follow what's happening. So I think international support, what the Huntington say, is the demonstration effect on the region that helped the smooth transformation in the Eastern European countries in the 1990s. That was the lacking. That was no any support and interest from the West when it comes to American, when it comes to unfortunately Arabic nations to help. Well, one more reason perhaps, the Israel effect, the security news of Israel, so which is also a component in the whole equilibrium of the perception of the Western interest. So there has been a lot of complicating issue that really badly affected and created today's conundrum in the region. Turning back to why America and some strategists enjoyed support of at least let the forces fight each other in the region to make these countries perhaps more democracy, simply because if tomorrow's world would be a world on the basis of struggle from the West and the East, which means mostly America versus China, if this is the new game that some people envision, then they cannot really find a common ground, or they cannot control the rest of the world. If and only the Middle Eastern countries can be patronized by the West. Well, this is a little perhaps gloomy story, but this is my idea that American Western scholars or strategists somehow try to manipulate the Middle Eastern transformation in the Arab Spring era. They wanted to have, after just the first election, want to see a new liberal-like leadership in the region. But what happened was that it was a conservative element based on the Islamic tradition, which is the real common ground. I mean, if there is any defining elements of identity, based, common cultural identity in the region, which is the Islam and religion. And it was the only religious groups who were organized, like the one Ikhwan in Egypt and in other countries as well. So if the public space is open for competition, they were the more ready to intervene and organize political parties, run for election, and rule the country. Well, which is what the West actually wanted to see. Okay, then especially in Egypt, the Mursi power, when the Mursi comes to power, they didn't like it, nor Israel didn't like it. Okay, then It was perhaps other elements as well for security needs, but it was a kind of unexpected result for the Western scholars who wanted to see the change, but the actors of the change were not the ones who wanted. It was a frustration, political frustration for the American strategy. So what they did was, okay, don't support the democracy because democracy produced the actors who are against our interests, and let them fight each other. I think that was the critical point, especially 2013. I remember Obama's conversation with Turkish actors, especially President Erdogan. Let's do something together, support the political change, peaceful change, especially in Syria. But they never really supported the peaceful political democratization of the region, because they come to realize that okay, if we let the free elections, the actors that comes to power will not be the ones that we want to be. So then don't let a peaceful transformation, but rather let them enjoy fighting each other. Perhaps they will eventually learn how to live together rather than under the auspice of or under the guidance of some democratic countries. I remember, for instance, one of the books. I'll just refer to you. Perhaps you might prefer to read Graham Fuller books, A World Without Islam, which was published, I think, 2010 or early 11. You can check it through the internet. What he says is that, I mean, the West should not be in permanent fight with the Middle Eastern country or Islamic country. It is not the sources of the violence, be it Daesh, be it Al Qaeda, or September 11 or others. It is not because of the based on cultural understanding or religion, but it is a geopolitical fight. I think they are right in the sense that this region has been conceived and perceived by especially from the intellectual point of view, from Western understanding, more violent-prone region. Was because of the cultural tradition, especially from religion-wise, or some others. I think a racial understanding must focus on multidimensionality of the source of violence, and we should reanalyze the political, economic, social condition, why this kind of religiously originated groups from Al Qaeda to the Daesh and others emerged from this. I think it was right. I mean, especially the report that was prepared after 9/11, as just mentioned by the US Congress. Okay, it was a lack of opportunity, both economics, also political and social mobilization and more freedom and rights. If there's no legitimate channels inside a country to address the grievances that people feel, like the poverty, lack of economic opportunities, education resources, and job employment and freedom for criticism at the basic level, then people tend to look at around what can be done and how can address themselves through the mosque or through the religious-based Sufi orders or organization or brotherhood of the Islamic Brotherhood or Ikhwan Muslimin in many Arabic countries. So these kind of organizations somehow serve as the channel of communication, and some might turn out to be violently. That is the story of today's Middle East, and the solution must be based on somehow open space for people's demand and providing more freedom and rights. If you don't provide them, then they might turn to more violent. And what I'm trying to say, the West and the rest also discussed why Middle East becomes so much a conflicted point and what it happened. The strategists like the Graham Fuller was saying that, okay, up until now, the West somehow controlled the region through the establishing channels at the authoritarian monarchy level, and somehow served the best interests of America, opening space for American commerce, providing cheap oil, and somehow helping also to Israel security. But it is not sustainable anymore. Then let the forces play out their own role and change the Middle East. Even it cannot be a perfect democracy in the West, but at least some kind of competition and capitalism which might open the world to enable people-to-people relations with the West and the rest. We shouldn't too much alienate and satanize this region. We have to depend on each other. The West, especially the Western Europe, because of the growing age population issue, unpredictability, but at the same time, just across the Mediterranean, you will see the youngest generation of the Arab youth. If we cannot create a common understanding based on values, that was my point. It was creating a democracy and let the people enjoy some, at least some political and social rights, and also an open economy. It might also serve in the best interest of the West, generally speaking, because if you create a middle class in the region, especially in the Arabic countries, which is very young, it serves as the best market, a new opening for the West. But also, if we create a peaceful understanding between West and the Middle Eastern Muslim countries, then it might serve for the interest of the West, because they need human resources. They need human resources. Young generation, they cannot bring from China, from India, but the closest region is North Africa and the Middle East. Let's create a common understanding based on political values. That was the strategic purpose of so-called Greater Middle East project in the early 2000s. But unfortunately, its effect was held a little late, 1 decade later, in the 2010s. But again, I think the fear factor of the Western intellectual consciousness prevailed over their hope that it can be by itself just smoothly goes well, and liberal actors might emerge. No, democracy in any part of the world can only be learned through the error and mistakes, and people learn. I think now in the region, especially the American support to Egyptian Sisi military coup, the Russian comes down to help the dictator Bashar Assad in the Syrian case, that almost cost 1 million people's life in Syria. Today in Egypt, unfortunately, economy, politics, and society is in disarray, in the conflict, and there is a chaotic conditions. So some people call this so-called constructive chaos. The chaos that can use the constructive policies or to persuade people of the region to the strongest or great powers demands. I don't know. This is at least speculation about it. But in this context, then, since America and the Western hesitancy how to deal with the new condition of the Middle East, I think they still hesitate how to handle the issue. If the irony here is that the paradox here is that if they support a genuine democracy in the region, the rules elected through the democracy is not working for the best interest of the West. If we try to control of the leadership, it creates some other complications. So I think it's a dilemma. It's a dilemma that we have to achieve, especially from the Western point of view. But from the non-Western global actors, I'm now coming to here because my lecture is about the Middle Eastern great power politics. When it comes to, I spent so much time to explain how the United States and Europe actually approaching to the Middle East. But also we do have now, as just I mentioned, some regional and global powers who has interest in the region, in the Middle East. Of course, from the Cold War era, we also mentioned the Soviet Union. Soviet Union has always been finding some ally here who are not going well with the West, especially in the post 1967 in Egypt. They come close to the Soviet Union, a new approach. Syria was always been in good relation with the Soviet Union during that post-Cold War era. Libya somehow enjoyed with the, some kind of socialism, so-called Kitab al-Ahdar or green, some kind of Islamic socialism that Gaddafi was developing or enjoying. Even in Algeria and others, some Arab Muslim countries in the Middle East also from time to time flirted with the Soviet Union style democracy or cooperation. But in the post-Cold War era, since the Soviet Union collapsed, a new emerging Russia were in disarray, especially during the Boris Yeltsin era, the Chechen War, and the instability in the Caucasus prevented Russia looking to the Middle East for a while. But it certainly find a good friend with the Iran, and Russia has been in good relation, and today's nuclear program, especially under the 1990s, actually were developed by the help of the Russia in Iran. So what I'm trying to say is that for the new Russia under the leadership of the Putin has been rediscovering or following the geopolitical interests that has been long defined in the 17th, 18th century charts of the Russia of the time. And one geopolitical aim of the charts from Russia under Tsars, Russia under Soviet Union, or today's Russia under Putin. There is no change. They want to reach out the warm weathers, warm seas, which is namely Mediterranean. I think the social, political, and strategic context that created by the domestic war in Syria, especially in the Arab Spring, started in the 2011, 12, 13, 14. At the end of the day, there were two protectors for the Bashar Assad that he might depend solely on. One is Russia with all political, economic, and military weapon systems at the UN level as well. Also, more closer at home is Iran. So both of them actually supported the Sham, the Damascus regime to stay in the power, and that was so much bloody conflict still happen in today's Syria. But it was a turning point at some point when the opposition, military opposition against Bashar Assad gained some ground on the landscape, and Iran was under the sanctions, and it was not available anymore. Then, together with the Iran and the Bashar Assad regime, official called Russia to intervene. It was the 2015. It started cooperation strategically in 2013, but heavily and officially, it was Putin, Russia, who were able to find ground to, in the eyes of the international relations, international powers, who were able to come down to Syria and establish a strong hand in Syria today. It is in Tartus sea harbor, but also land military bases were demanded and recognized for upcoming 100 years. It is a permanent game from the Russian geopolitical point of view. That's why Russia is playing a major role in reshaping the perhaps a political and diplomatic settlement of Syrian affairs in the upcoming years. So the Genoa process, the Astana process, together with Turkey and Iran, it is playing a major role in the lack of interest of the West, generally speaking. In just 2 or 3 years, there is no the West and America when it comes to Syrian affairs. The Trump administration only interested in the supporting the PKK's extension over the YPG, which is the northeastern part of today's Syria, so-called Kurdish self-governing region, against its NATO ally Turkey. That's the very big problem. That's why I will come to that. But what I'm trying to say that for the Russia, be it in Syria today or be it in Libya, it also has some interest over there, which has been a good ally in the Cold War era as well, recreating or re-establishing this military ties and gaining some geopolitical ground. That's why still Russia play a bigger role than anybody else in today's Syria. For the Russia, why was the Russia interested in somehow democratization of the Middle East? I don't think so. I don't think so, simply because Russia is not interested in the true democracy, but on the facet of democracy. Yes, they run at home, but they are also as much concerned as the West in terms of Middle Eastern Islamization. So when the conflict starts in domestic violence and the civil war starts in Syria, I think it was Russia that become really happy. Why? I mean, at the first place, Russia still somehow tried to control Central Asian, Muslim, Turkic, Republican countries, even though they become independent totally in the aftermath of the Cold War. They are still somehow, because of politics or intellectual or energy resources somehow, they have to find a way to get along with Russia, otherwise they cannot survive. Russia knows it, and Russia is using its all powers to control, to take the control of these regions. And that's why it's tried to create a new Eurasian Economic Union. As you may see nowadays, Russia sending the military powers as well, if needed, in Armenia, Azerbaijan, or Belarus, or Kazakhstan, or Kyrgyzstan, whatever it is. So if democracy actually develop in the Islamic countries, it is a direct threat to Russia interest as well. Not only for just Central Asia, that there are about 20% population of Russia are Muslim, be it Chechens or Dagestanis or Tatars and other Turkic groups, including the Crimea, the Muslim Tatars. They're all Muslim people. So then they might create this movement of democracy, if it reached up to Caucasia and Central Asia with a strong moment, as was the case somehow in the previous era, it might create a directly threat to security interest of Russia. So that's also why Russia do not want to see a genuine democracy and human rights regimes in the region. Whereas to China and other big powers, as a part of the UN Security Council, one of the P5, well, I mean, there is no doubt that there's no need to explain that more movement of democracy in the world is totally against the Chinese interest as well. I mean, when it comes to Tiananmen Square events as early as 1990s, and later on the Chinese treatment of the Uyghur Turks, Muslim Turks in the northwestern part of the China, which is strategically very critical to its own existence. You know how to approach the Chinese approach to Uyghur Turkish Muslims. So certainly China has no interest in developing or supporting democracy. Or what it wants is from the Middle East. Its geopolitical interest is reaching out to energy resources, and that's why China has always been at the UN Security Council against any plan for political change and for democracy, together with Russia, so-called double veto. 3 or 4 times used their veto power at the UN Security Council for punishing, for instance, Bashar Assad when he used chemical arms against the civilian population, even though it is an international a criminal act of war. But they don't care. I mean, as long as their interest is not solved. This is the perception of politics, unfortunately, in real time. So the last point is more regional power like Turkey and Iran. For Turkey, as a Muslim country, as a somehow capitalist economy since the 1950s, any kind of peaceful democratic change in the region are welcome. It was the Turkish official position in 2011 and 2012, and it is still today. It is very much consistent with its support to political transformation, democratization, and human rights support to, in the region. That's why Turkey opposed the Sisi's military coup in 2013 in Egypt. That's why Turkey is very much supporting the peaceful transformation in today's, be it Libya or Yemen or Syria or Jordan or Lebanon. Perhaps it is the only Turkey really, truly, genuinely supporting the local transformation, because as the Muslim nation, as a most developed Muslim nation in this part of the world, and also as a ruler of the region about more than 400 years up until 1920s, Turkey seriously wants a stable, secure, and democratic Middle East, which will be a new area of a sphere of prosperity, peace, and security. I think for the near future, that is the best vision and best hope for everybody in the region. For Iran, I am just coming to an end. Iran also is not totally different from in terms of its political foreign policy approach to the Syria and other conflicts. They are not. I mean, they don't want to enjoy. They don't see democracy in Syria based on the free elections, but rather perhaps a regime like Iran itself. So it put Iran, Russia, and China at the same page for this specific region. And what Iran tried to achieve in Syria, especially, because of its ongoing fight with the so-called ideology fight against the West and Israel, they want to create an Iranian ally in the region permanently, and it was only Bashar Assad who might play this role. But if a new actor comes, they may not anymore become an Iranian dependable government. So the already existing structure must be protected according to Iran, and Syria and others must be. It doesn't matter, I mean, for Iran, whether they are democracy or not, but whether they serve the geopolitical interest of Iran, defined by Iran, their strategic depth from Afghanistan through the Iran and Syria, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. So that is their imaginative security line, and that is a struggle line for them. Unfortunately, that created this insoluble Syrian conflict in the region. So coming to an end, I think in upcoming decade, the Middle East sooner or later will achieve the transformation, and whoever comes to power in the region, they will be perhaps more rational, especially after the conflict. It's not easy to create a stable government, but international actors, international community, UN, and world leadership, great powers somehow should come actually to create a new framework of stability and cooperation. A Middle East pact based on a comprehensive pact based on mutual understanding, and which is open to everybody's participation, will be the one which might serve at least for this recreation of the stability in the region. I don't know who will bring this framework on table. Perhaps it must be Turkey and some other great powers. But for the near future, unfortunately, I'm not really too much hopeful. For the mid and long term, I am hopeful because the force of people's power cannot be solvable. Sooner or later, the will of the people will and should prevail in the region for establishing a peaceful order in the region, which might also contribute to the multi-ordered international system in the upcoming 2 decades. Thank you. If there is a questions, I will be happy. Betul was somehow writing to me. The first one is following typologies. Yes, it is just adding to information as I just provided. Some people use for the Middle East and Near East. Yes, it used to, but now I think the Middle East or some books and strategists or scholars use MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, as a single entity in the region. I still, in the Middle East, it was the actual Mashriq or Arabic countries. There was no Middle East or Near East, but it was the Syria, Bilad al-Sham, it was Iraq, Okay, let me just give explain. It was the Iraq. Iraq was three provinces during the time of Ottoman: Mosul, Basra, and Baghdad. All Syria was actually called Bilad Sham. Lebanon was Jebel Lebanon, as far as I know. Jordan was part of the just greater map. So the Egypt was Misr or Egypt and Mashriq, and for the west of the Egypt, it was the Maarif. Maarif in Ottoman books, you can see a lot of reference to Maarif. Okay, let me. Have you seen China-Pakistan economic corridor for the upcoming year? Many Middle East countries, even Turkey and Russia, are showing their interest in this great project. Yes, of course. I mean, China's One Belt, One Road project is indeed must indeed be perceived as a geopolitical project, in the sense that in order to break the containment policy of America that was declared in 2012, that project was created by China to await the fate that Russia, Soviet Union faced. And that is a great project from east to west, from Beijing to London, from the land, over the land, and from the sea. China is creating a huge incentives for everybody who is willing to support. So China is really playing big to stop the American containment policy against its growing power. And I think so far it's achievable. One student asked what happened in Strait of Hormuz and what policy backed that Strait of Hormuz today. Well, I mean, Hormuz, sometimes we call it Basra Gulf of Basra, or Arabic Gulf. It's a contested name by Iran and Arabic and sides. But anyhow, it is a real passage between the, especially for the oil resources, it has been always on the agenda of great powers, and especially with America and Iran. I remember in the 1980s as well, because there's a huge discussion and even fighting for the oil resources. Okay, West is promoting democracy by force in countries which oppose their agenda. On the other side, why they are supporting the monarchy of the Middle Eastern countries? As just said, I mean, whoever serves your best interests, it doesn't matter the cat is black or white, it's a democratic or non-democratic. If a monarch serves for the best interest of the West, well, they prefer the monarch instead of democracy. Unfortunately, this is the hypocrisy of the Western Democrats, so-called Democrats, but this is so. Do you think the current Middle Eastern policies, especially United Arab Emirates, are sustainable on the long run, speaking economically? I mean, United Arab Emirates, yes, it's an oil-rich country, but unfortunately, they spend this money, the petrodollars, so to speak, very lavishly. They're wasting their money. They need to buy their security from outside. All of the Gulf region actually outsourcing their security, because they have so much valuable minerals, oils, hydrocarbons, but they have no power. Well, it's a dilemma, it's an irony, paradox. How can they survive? But they are not using rationally their money, and the oil somehow will come to an end, perhaps 20 years, 30 years, perhaps 40 years. It is in the long run, I don't find their policies of providing arms, providing support to military in different parts of the world is sustainable, especially their play against Turkey is not acceptable nor sustainable. They have no, real army, etc. They are only creating fitna or problem in the region, which is not also serving their best interest in the long run as well. Because if you play hard, somebody else will have to play hard against you as well tomorrow. So it's a counterproductive policy if you support the violence in any part of the world. Do you agree that by intervening in Syrian and Libyan conflicts, Russia is simply trying to implement its multipolar doctrine? Well, I mean, I don't know what they believe in terms of the world politics, but what they believe in power. Russia understands that power is not based on balance of power or responsible use of power, but just use of power. This is what they believe, and I don't think they will consider any limitation to their power. If you are powerful, you must get what you want, and this is a geopolitical game. They are very much playing hard in different parts of the world because of the power vacuum created by the decline of the West and American hegemony, especially in this part of the world. It's a big game. Can you please tell the role of Turkey in protecting the Uyghurs from Chinese authorities? Well, I mean, it is a real, hard issue to discuss just in 1 minute, because I have left only 1 minute. But I should say, in the past, Turkey, and today, from the humanistic point of view, Turkey is helping a lot in Uyghur people in any way it can. Not perhaps directly, but state power, but for many NGOs are really supporting the Uyghur people, the Uyghur diaspora. That's why whoever were able to escape from Chinese control and Chinese massacre in the region, they somehow want to come to Turkey, and they might somehow settle in Turkey. So we don't see them different from any Turkish people or Muslim people who come from like Syria or Balkans or other regions. Whoever comes to Anatolia, Turkey to live, Turkey open its arms and support it. But when it comes to, if you are just meaning that why Turkey is not fighting against China to support Uyghur, which is total different issue, which is not so much rational to support this. Rather, what Turkey is trying to help the Uyghurs, trying to establish strong ties with China central government, and so that by creating confidence building with the Chinese authorities, indirectly, Turkey, the only way that Turkey can help the Uyghurs through the talking directly with the Beijing to address the humanitarian, social, and religious issues in Uyghurs. Now, it's a policy, you like it or not, but this is the policy of Turkey for time being. There are some other countries who want to use a misuse of the Uyghur issue against China. Well, this is something else. All right, I think it is enough, and my time is up. Thank you very much for listening. I hope my lectures will be beneficial for you, enhancing your knowledge on the when it comes to the Middle East. Bye-bye.